looks up. Get started. Hold on. Did I put these on for y'all? This next set of slides? The crisis of union? Okay. Well, I will try to do that when this could be fun because I don't have these in order. I haven't had my life in order, to be perfectly honest, right now. So we're going to see which set, because for some reason these slides are in like 4 sets, and I didn't pull them out. And if you notice, I didn't put the test up. This looks like at least the first one. Okay, last semester, or the last semester that I did this class was when I found out I had cancer, and I missed like the last 3 weeks. But we just went like completely online, kind of ad lib went online. So this is the lecture. Do you want me to give you the slides with the lectures in them or take them out? You don't have to listen to them to see the slides, but they're there if you wanted them. Okay. Okay. Because I've been, like, I think it hit about Halloween. And it hit kind of, we were about in the same place, but I've been giving you the slides that don't have the lectures in them. Because that's how we managed. I couldn't come into class because I'd had surgery. And so I would just record the lectures on the PowerPoints and send them out to everybody. And that's how we got through the last few weeks. Well, apparently this set of slides, I didn't save a master copy that doesn't have the little lectures on them. And so you're going to get them in 4 parts. Because I felt it was really cruel to give somebody a whole section at one time. So I would send them out in pieces. Okay, to explain that, and I don't have slides, so for me to look at, so we're just going to wing this. Winging it's good. Let me close the door though before we start. Like I started to say, I didn't post a test for the last section because I forgot on Monday. And I thought about it on Tuesday. It got busy. And then Wednesday, I decided it's too close to the holidays. They can take it with the final. You can either take it with the final, or if y'all want, I will try to remember and post it today, and y'all will have all week to take it. Is that what y'all would prefer? Okay, I have a few heads nodding. So I will post it today, but I will let it run through the final. I'm planning on posting the final after Friday's class, and y'all will have until midnight on the 6th to get it done, because the 6th is the day of our final. And it's not going to be, it's going to be the same thing we've done. It's just going to be a test over this last section. And the test that I'll post today will be a test over the last section, but nobody wants to think about a test during Thanksgiving, so I figured y'all would forgive me for not posting it. Okay, so let's figure out why we got to the war, which we're going to get to the war, we're just not going to get into the war. You know, everything is an effect of decisions. Good decisions, bad decisions, y'all see that in your own lives, you know. This morning is a perfect example of that. I made the decision last Wednesday not to stop to get gas, which meant this morning I had to stop and get gas because I didn't have enough to get to town. I had enough to get to the gas station, but not much further than that, because I have a really bad tendency to wait till it gets to empty. Therefore, I had to plan that into my morning, which I did. What I didn't plan was to have 3 phone calls from my husband telling me to go back to the house and get stuff that he forgot. And I mean, they all came in before I'd actually left the house, but it was like, can you get this for me? Can you get this for me? So by the time it was actually time for me to leave, the time I had factored in for stopping to get gas was gone. Hence, I'm late. So that is an inconsequential effect of decisions, but some decisions had more an issue, national type issues. And slavery in the territories was one of the biggest issues facing the country in 1840. And this is going to overlap with some of the Manifest Destiny stuff that we have already talked about. But just bear with me, because all of this overlaps. You can't talk about it purely in chronological order, or that would be more like a stream of consciousness thing and would be really confusing. The slavery in the territory was an issue. As you figured out, the country is kind of divided already. You have the North, doesn't have slavery, pretty much has outlawed it. South has slavery. The West has some, has some in some areas, doesn't have some in other areas. And we're bringing more Western territories in. So as we're fighting the war with Mexico, this issue comes up again. We'd been fighting for about 3 months when David Wilmot, who was a Pennsylvania congressman and a Democrat, made a proposal called the Wilmot Proviso. He wanted, obviously, we were going to win the war, we're going to bring in all this new territory. So he wanted to pass a law through Congress that assured that those territories brought in from Mexico would be free from slavery. His logic was that Mexico had outlawed slavery. Slavery wasn't allowed there anyway. Well, legally was not allowed there anyway. I mean, in Texas, they had brought in lots of slaves. Some of the other areas had a few, but not many. So he wanted to pass this law. It would allow Texas to come in as a slave state, but it would disallow slavery in all of the other Mexican cessions. In 46, James Polk prevailed on Wilmot to withdraw the provision. John Calhoun countered with the Fifth Amendment that if we had passed the Wilmot Proviso, that would be a violation of the Fifth Amendment. The Fifth Amendment guarantees you life, liberty, and property in every state. Every state has to treat the citizens of one state as they would the citizens of another. So if it's legal in one state, it should be legal in another. Hence, Calhoun argues, slaves are property, and you can't prevent me from bringing my property anywhere I go. So we're kind of raising the stakes in the argument now. He's using the Bill of Rights now as a defense of slavery. To counter this and the Wilmot provision, the idea of popular sovereignty was put forth. And it was put forth by Thomas Benton, who is a Southern senator, if I remember correctly. He is the father-in-law to Fremont, who has explored all out west. And this idea is put forth because Oregon wants to come in as a state. Oregon has organized. They have outlawed slavery. And after a lot of wrangling, Oregon was allowed to come in free, but Benton proposed that the rest of the territories, it not be left to Congress, but it be left to the territory to decide whether they wanted to be a slave state or a free state. And this sort of calmed things down for the moment, kind of kept the peace. When the election of 48 came, Polk kept his word and stayed out. He actually is one of the only presidents who did pretty much what he wanted to do in office, and then kept his promise not to run again, because he had made that promise to begin with. The Whigs ran Zachary Taylor, and there's a new party that has come in, the Free Soil Coalition. The Free Soil Coalition is a new party. It's anti-labor, or anti-slavery. Sorry, I saw the word labor. Rather than being abolitionist, their party line was that they wanted to stop the expansion of slavery. Leave it where it's at. Let it be there. But don't let it go anywhere else. And it was made up of Northern Democrats, anti-slavery Whigs, and the people who were left over from the Liberty Party. It was centered in New York, and they ran Martin Van Buren as their candidate. And their slogan was kind of cool: free soil, free speech, free labor, free men. And they did have an effect on it. They didn't win, obviously, an election because they're a third party. Third parties never win. But it did have an effect on the election. Ohio went Democrat, New York went Whig, and in the end, Zachary Taylor comes out the winner. Now, Taylor is kind of a different breed. Taylor made his name as a soldier, as an officer in the Mexican War. He is a war hero. That's why they chose him. Poor Clay got passed over again. They chose Taylor because he was a war hero. He had a lot of appeal, but he wasn't a politician. He was a soldier, and he looked at things the way a soldier might rather than a politician. And this is going to affect a few things. One being California. So we're finally into the 40s, and we finally get to the California gold rush. I know I have mentioned it before, but now we're going to really talk about it a little more in detail. So January 24th, 1848, gold was found at Sutter's Mill. Sutter's the expatriate Swede who came to the United States to basically avoid debtor's prison. Had set up a little colony that was supposed to be a Swiss colony, but none of the other Swiss came with him. They found gold. So he did bring a lot of people. He didn't bring the Swiss that he promised, but he brought a lot of people into California. In fact, that was the greatest mass migration in U.S. history. 9 days after gold was found, California legally switches over to being an American territory. When gold was found, it was still technically part of Mexico. Hundreds of thousands of men, mostly men, some women, mostly men, surged west. You could go cross country. You could take a steamboat around the Horn of Mexico. You could go down to Panama, cross the Isthmus, which is now the Panama Canal, pick up another steamboat and go on up. But however you get there, By 1849, 80,000 gold miners had reached California, and at least half of the population in California was now American. Pretty good for having only been an American territory for less than a year. By 1854, 300,000 miners are going to go to California. They came from every class, every state, every territory. Most were young, unmarried. They were not interested in permanent settlements. They were mostly interested in getting out there, getting gold, going home and buying a farm or buying the business or whatever their dream was. Enough men went that it upset the gender ratio in New York, or not New York, in all of New England. And it takes about 10 years for it to level back out again. So for about 10 years, it became real hard to find a husband in New England because all the men had gone. And this gold rush had some advantages. One, gold surged into the economy. It spurred railroad lines, telegraph lines. It shifted our focus more westward and started dreams of an American empire based in the Pacific. There had been Americans in California, and we talked about that when Fremont was exploring, but not a lot. Now there's a lot. So all of a sudden there's enough to be a state. So when you look at some of these early maps, like if you look in your books on the voting maps, you'll have all these states over here on the East Coast in California, and everything in the middle is a territory. Oregon will be a state. But you have these two dots over here on the West Coast and nothing in the middle. But this gold coming into the economy is going to help. People tend to be a little more rational, let's say, when the economy is good. And that's going to kind of, again, help keep things balanced. But now California has all these people, and they want to come in as a state, and they want to come in as a free state. New Mexico is also forming up. Texas is being an issue because we're still claiming all that blue area that's over in New Mexico, what we would consider New Mexico today. And Congress is having to sort all of this out. Californians had already formed a government and had adopted a constitution by 1850. The Mormons were also forming up for a state. They had drafted laws for Deseret, which included much of the Mexican cession, including part of California. The Mormons were claiming that strip from San Diego up to Los Angeles on the coast. So, I can't read stakes. So basically, they were claiming all of Utah, all of Nevada, and all the way over to the coast. And we still have an issue with Mormonism in our country at this time because they're practicing polygamy. And that's a problem for a lot of people as far as wanting to let them in as a state. And they're also claiming territory that another state is claiming. So Congress had a lot of things in front of them. And Taylor, being a good soldier, said, let California in as a free state. Let New Mexico in as a free state. Who cares about this balance of power thing? That's not an issue. These people want to be a state. They want a free state, let them in. Like I said, he looked at things more as a soldier. But the rest of Congress was not, the rest of the government was not quite in agreement. California is, however, going to end that balance of power. Taylor is also a Southerner, and the Southerners thought he would pretty much rally to their side, but he was a soldier. and a unionist as well. So he was not ready to split the country apart based on slavery, and he was a slave owner. Where are we? California Gold Rush, Compromise of 1850. So to deal with all of these issues, Congress turned to Henry Clay. Now Clay is getting a little long in the tooth. He's 73 at this point. Still a little bitter because he's never been nominated as president or elected as president. But he has calmed down a bit since the last compromise, and he's called again to be the great compromiser. And in the name of the Union, he puts aside his personal desires and works towards that. So the main players in this are Henry Clay, John Calhoun, Daniel Webster, William Seward, Stephen Douglas, and Jefferson Davis. And Clay comes up with a compromise idea. And it has eight parts. Clay and Daniel Webster together work this out. We're going to admit California as a free state, organize the territories of New Mexico and Utah with no reference to slavery, therefore allowing the residents to decide, deny Texas claim to New Mexico, compensate Texas by the federal government paying the pre-annexation Texas debt. Texas also got to keep all of its public lands, which will be important later on after the war, which was probably about $10 million. They would retain slavery in D.C. because slavery in D.C. was becoming an issue, but they would abolish the slave trade in D.C. and across its borders. So you could no longer trade slaves in Washington, D.C. And why this is a distinction between abolishing slave and abolishing slave trade, the slave trade was kind of in your face. You know, they would march shackled slaves down the streets of Washington to these big open arenas where they would have slave auctions. It was kind of hard to not see. And you're doing this in the nation's capital, where you have people from all over the country with all kinds of different ideas. So it's very obnoxious to some. So abolish the slave trade. To pacify the South, we're going to adopt a more effective slave law and deny Congress the right to interfere with interstate slave trade. Clay gave a moving speech about, saving the Union, compromise, and they can't quite get it through. On March 4th, Calhoun, who is also up in there in age and very ill, came to the floor and gave a speech. He wrote it. Another gentleman delivered it, warning of disunion, and died 3 weeks later. And they can't pass a compromise as one bill. They can't get anybody to agree on all 8 parts. So Webster gives another speech, another voice of compromise, but they still can't get it passed. And part of the problem is the president. Taylor is not on board with this. But things happen. On July 4th, 1850, you have your July 4th celebration because that has always been a big to-do in the United States. It's July in Washington, D.C., so it's hot, it's humid. Taylor attends to listen to the speech. He dies 5 days later, probably something he ate. He dies, I don't know if it was dysentery or something else, but they figure it was probably something he ate. He is replaced by Millard Fillmore. Now, Millard Fillmore is pretty much the exact opposite of Taylor. He is a career politician. He is a Yankee, or he's a Northerner. He is a self-made man. He had put himself through law school and worked his way up through the political ranks to be vice president. He is the last person that the Southerners thought would be on their side. But he supports Clay's compromise. But they're still having a problem getting it passed. So Stephen Douglas steps in to help with this compromise. He kind of doesn't pull a fast one, but sort of. He breaks the compromise into 3 parts where he can rally enough support for the different parts to get it passed. You won't vote for the fugitive slave law, but you'll vote for California, and you'll vote for the California-Texas part. Okay, we're going to pull the California-Texas part over here. We'll put the slave law over here because all the Southerners are going to vote for that. We can get that passed. And he breaks it into parts, and they pass. So but altogether, they are called the Compromise of 1850. And what they actually end up with is, 1, California entering as a free state. So now there is no longer a balance in the Senate. The South will be forever a minority, or at this point will be a minority in the Senate. Texas, New Mexico, the Texas-New Mexico Act is passed. That settles the border at its present location, made New Mexico a territory, and paid Texas $10 million. The third, so they break it into 5 parts. The third, Utah is set up as a territory. And both it and New Mexico are set with all lawful subjects of legislation, which is a vague term that means nothing. What it meant to Northerners was that the people in the territories could choose whether to be slave or free. What it meant to Southerners was that the Fifth Amendment would be applied and they could take their slaves anywhere they wanted. It says neither. It just says all lawful subjects of legislation. The Fugitive Slave Act is passed. And that was it's a big boon for slave owners in the South. Well, obviously, all the slave owners are in the South. But in a way, it is also a big boon for the abolitionist. It becomes much more important as a symbol than it does as an actual functioning law. And then the slave trade is abolished in Washington, D.C., but slavery is left intact there. The fugitive slave law strengthened the hand of slave catchers. They offered a $10 bounty on any slave that was caught. The slave was not allowed a jury trial, so basically had no chance to prove he wasn't a slave. So all of a sudden, all of the free blacks are on edge because you could be snagged by a slave catcher, declared to be a slave, and taken back, and essentially sold to some plantation. The abolitionists immediately vowed to break the law at the soonest possible convenience. Anybody who did that or who attempted to interfere with the slave catcher could be fined $1,000. You could be fined for not giving up information. It was really a one-sided law. And there were a few, not many, attempts by Northerners to save captured slaves, free them from the bounty hunters. One ended up with the death of a sheriff because he had put the slave in jail for safekeeping. The mob attacked the jail. The marshal or sheriff got killed. But that didn't happen too often. And not as many slaves as you would think were returned to the South. Only about 200 in the 1 or 2 years that the slave law exists. Or it exists for longer than that. But what it turns into is a rallying cry for the North. It's much more symbolic than it is effective. The other very symbolic thing that comes out of the slave law, is Uncle Tom's Cabin, written by Harriet Beecher Stowe. And if we've heard the name Beecher several times. She is the wife, sister, daughter. There's one more, maybe niece of ministers who all preached against slavery. She writes this book, Uncle Tom's Cabin, after the fugitive slave law is passed and her sensibilities are aroused. And although it is a fictional account, it paints a very graphic picture of slavery in the South. And it becomes an instant bestseller, particularly in the North, but it sells well in the South too because the Southerners need to see what they're fighting against and see what all the fuss is about. And it had a big effect in turning people against slavery. Now, it takes a while for a novel to do that, but it does have that effect. The same year, we have the election of 1852. And we have no slide there because we've run out. Hang on. Go back to this. The election of 1852. We only get 2 slides on this one, but we'll probably be done by then. The Democrats are going to choose Franklin Pierce. The Whigs are going to go back to their, tried and true, we're going to pick a war hero, so they get General Winfield Scott. And the Free Soilers are going to run John Hale. Pierce wins with an overwhelming lead. He is a former congressman, a senator, and a soldier. He is the youngest president, and he's pretty much a failure as president. That's kind of cruel. He tried to keep everybody happy. He was a people pleaser, and you can't do that as a president. You can't keep all the sides happy. So after about 6 months, even the Whigs had given up on him. So from 1852 to about 1856, we have a president but he is not effective at all. And this is a time when we really, really need to have some good leadership. The Compromise of 1850 is keeping things, the tensions are still high, but it's keeping things sort of balanced for the time being. But the issues are still coming up. And Pierce is not the one to deal with them. Now, he does deal with a few, successfully, with a few foreign issues. We make a run at Cuba. We try to incite the Cubans to rebel. And then when that fails and the Cubans don't gain their own independence, we offer to buy Cuba from Spain. And the only thing that comes out of it is the Ostend Manifesto, which pretty much it's going to be the McKinley doctrine all over again. The British and the French will stay out. You know, we put out this manifesto that they need to stay out of Latin America. We do, however, make some good diplomatic gains in Asia. This is when Matthew Perry, bless you, sails to Japan. Japan had closed its borders to most everybody in the early 1800s. And Admiral Perry manages to break through. He is a great diplomat. He befriends the Japanese, and he opens trade with them. We're one of the only countries at this point that are trading with the Japanese, and we also open greater trade with China. Particularly now that we have California and this Pacific coast area that we can work off of. San Francisco booms during the gold rush. Its population, I mean, it was a village, seaside village, basically, before the gold rush. And within a couple of years, the population increases 50 times. And it is now suddenly one of the largest cities in the United States and a seaport. But because you're on the West Coast, you're closer to Asia than you are to Europe. That's where the trade is starting to come through. And you also start getting immigration of the Chinese. A lot of them work as labor in the mines. They're going to work on the railroads. They become the Irish of the West Coast. All right, and we run out of slides again. All right, we are. Is that the same? Hang on, I got to see what I've done. No, that's the next selection. All right, so that is not what we need. Let's stop here, and then I will figure out these last two sections before class next time. And we will actually probably finish up, I'm guessing, maybe not. We've got to go through Kansas. Kansas was a mess. Kansas decided to have a preview for the Civil War, and but we will talk about that next time. Hopefully, we can get through the next section on Wednesday, and then we won't even come on Friday. I'll give you that as a study day, because I'm sure, if not for this class, you'll need a study day for something else. And yes, I forgot to pass around the sign-in sheet, so everybody's here.
That's from the last unit that
Yes,
you posted, if I could be, doesn't say, so
yes, I will post it today.
leave it on.
I will leave it on until finals, the end of final. That gives y'all a whole week.
And then when is the final gonna be?
I will post it Friday. If we get done on Wednesday, I might go ahead and post it Wednesday, but Friday at the latest.
Okay, thank you.